I'm so mean. Oh, goodness. And by the way, can I just tell you, I had so much fun with Scott today that I think he's in tears probably. Because he called me, and that's just what I do. With him, I fuck with him all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he called me today. He's like, well, how the podcast go and everything. I think it went pretty good. I'm really trying to understand how you justify, how you compare the Foo Fighters to NWA. And then he goes, well, I'd rather see a documentary, on musicians. And I get his point. I'd rather see a documentary on the music than their life stories. I'm like, yeah, but how do you go from NWA to the Foo Fighters? And I just kept riding it into the ground. And like typical Scott, within an hour, he's like, I'm really sorry, man. I hope I didn't mess anything up.
He took that more personal than he should have.
He just cracks me up. He takes things so seriously.
Yeah.
He means well. He's a great heart. I mean, he's a huge heart. That's why he does it. But
Well, I can sympathize.
Yeah.
I am very quick to jump up on the cross and nail myself in. I'm quite adept at it. I wear guilt like a cloak, and it goes on very easily. I feel bad all the time.
Aww.
It's just, and I'm not Catholic nor Jewish yet. I carry guilt on my back and always probably will.
I do too, but I hide it very, very well.
I'm always apologizing, even if I didn't do something wrong.
I live by deeds. You'll know if I think I've done wrong, I will make amends like ad nauseum. I'm a doer, not a talker.
You're a grower, not a shower.
Exactly. Well, I'll show it too for a little extra.
You pay me enough.
All right, you ready to give this a shot? And I'm just gonna, if you remember, I did that Chamber Stevens. I'm just gonna do it the same kind of concept. I'm just gonna do it as a special edition, and I'll explain that it's not taking the place of any other podcast. We're just et cetera, et cetera. I got a whole paragraph written. So
you sure that's how you want to go?
How do you want to go?
Yeah, sounds fine to me.
Okay.
Sure.
No. We'll find out. You got a different way? You'd rather just be like, hey, what's up, guy?
Yeah. What's that, bruh?
It's pretty similar. It'll come across fine.
All right.
Ready?
Yep.
I hate you. All right. Here we go. This is the Hollywood Outsider. I am your host, Aaron Peterson, and welcome to a special edition of the Hollywood Outsider podcast. I say special episode not because we're having a bunch of little special people running around, but we're not going to do our usual podcast right now. A new episode will be up on Thursday, as always. This is really an episode that isn't based on a film or TV related topic. What we're talking about today is Justin Macumber, who's obviously our illustrious host that's with us every week. He just had his first published novel called Haywire hit stores online and beyond. And we wanted to talk to him and kind of get his thoughts on how he became a writer, how that happened, and, hopefully pin him down before he launches into the Stephen King stratosphere. So, how you doing, Justin?
Good, though. I have to admit, this feels a little incestuous.
Doesn't it? It feels a little dirty.
Well, and we did it on my podcast. One of the co-hosts brought up the idea, since we record on Mondays, and this Monday, the following Tuesday was the book launch. He was like, it's your show. We should talk with you about your own book. And I'm like, God, doesn't it really seem so self-serving? And he's like, well, but it is your show. And if there's anybody who should, promote their work on it, it's you. And I guess so.
You can't argue that.
I give that a little credence, but it still feels kind of like, I don't know, you're my brother and we're just kind of tugging under the covers. It doesn't quite feel right, but maybe as we go, it'll start to feel right.
Well, let me explain that. It was actually my idea. I asked Justin to do this. He didn't imply it or beg or plead or say, you know what we really need is to get away from the movie podcast and really just talk about me.
It should be about literature.
Yeah.
It should be about books.
That never happened, but it could become a movie, so it could be relevant at some point.
But if it does, do you think they'll have to change the title because of that other Haywire?
No, you should mention it. You should never mention it. Haywire. I don't even know what that wasn't even a movie. All I know Haywire is a book. By Justin
we'll
Macumber.
see. I mean, originally Haywire had a different title, and it had that other title for a couple of years, but I never liked it, and it never really sat well on the page. And whenever I would pull the document up and see it, or I would reference it or say it, it just never felt right. And it took me up until not that long ago before I actually happened across Haywire as a title. And it did come to me before I ever heard of the film, thankfully. Otherwise, I would really feel bad. But for a long time, it did not have that title.
Well, let's go backwards a little bit.
All right.
You do have a lot of fans to the show, which is the main reason why we wanted to do this, because obviously, I mean, Justin, it's his first published novel. He wants to sell his book. Who wouldn't? I mean, your first book. And we think that we should help as much as we can. I've read some of it. I haven't read all of it yet. What I've read is really good. And I honestly, anybody that knows me knows that I would totally say something else. I would not say that if I didn't mean it. So
You're just trying to be nice about it.
yeah, I feel like he's got a book and it has pages.
I bet for fans of this type of book, it's really good.
But it's really not up my alley. You know what I prefer? Anything else.
It's not you. It's me.
It is, from what I've read, it's very good. You're doing a good job.
Thank you.
And I also read your short story, which was very good. Now, what I want to know first of all, have you always been interested in writing?
Yeah, in different forms. I didn't always want to be a novelist. When I was a kid, my father was in the Army, and so we spent a lot of time moving from base to base, always seeming to come back to Texas, where my mother's family lives. So every time in between his postings, we would move back to Texas and then off somewhere else. So I've lived a lot of places. Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, I think I'd moved to Maryland. I happened to chance upon some kids. No, this was actually in Fort Hood. Mm. Not that it matters, but I met some kids who played Dungeons and Dragons, and I'd never heard of it. Didn't know what it was. They said it was a game, but I didn't see any kind of gaming board or pieces. There were some dice, but they were some funky looking dice, and just lots of character sheets. And that made no sense to me that this is a game. But after they sat down and explained what D&D was, it really just intrigued me that you could play something with just dice and paper and words. And I learned how to play it, or as well as a kid can. But because we were kids, we couldn't just go to the store and buy the store sold manuals, which are the adventures, that the people at TSR who owned it at the time were putting out. So we had to make our own adventures. And because I'm a bit of a control freak, I always had to be the dungeon master. And the dungeon master makes the adventures. And so it was on me to break out the graph paper and the hex paper and draw the dungeons and the maps and create what the scenario was going to be for all of my friends to go off an adventure in. And for a good long while, I did that, and I really enjoyed the process of creating this world that people would have their adventures in, and trying to push them in certain ways, but always kind of being delighted when they found something or went somewhere that I didn't expect, and so I'd have to make things up on the fly. And that was really my first brush with just kind of that creative spirit and, the limited writing that I was capable of at the time. But when I got into middle school, I met a guy when I moved to a new location who wrote and drew his own comic book. And I read comics, loved comics, but I had never really thought that was something I could try and do. And he kind of opened my eyes to, the possibility of creating your own comic book. And I was never a good artist. I wished I had more artistic flair, but I don't. But when it came to actually writing it and creating all of these superheroes and I was more interested in creating the superhero and their origins and figuring out what their weaknesses were and why and how they became who they were, almost than I was in actually writing the stories. And so I think that's a lot of where I learned how to create characters. But I tried drawing a comic book and writing it, and I was never very good at it. And then I tried a little bit of poetry when I started first into my freshman year of high school. And I had a teacher named Miss Rose who really went out of her way to say nice things and encourage me to write. I don't think up until that point I had ever shown anything I'd created to an adult. It had always been, me and my kid friends. My parents never sat in on one of my gaming sessions, and they never read my comic books. But to have this teacher suddenly say, you have a real talent for, this, encouraged me to keep doing it. And I wrote poetry really for a good long while, and it's kind of embarrassing to look back on it now, but that kind of kept my writing spirit going. And it wasn't until I think I got into my junior and senior year of high school and started reading more novels and longer works that the idea of writing a novel came to my mind. And I kind of latched on to that through the last years of high school. And it's interesting, I was looking through my senior memory book because I graduated back in 91. So here I'm dating myself for everybody listening. And in my senior year of high school, we all could buy these memory books where you would put news clippings or photos and your little graduation name cards from friends and all sorts of shit. But in the first pages of it, people would write little notes to you. And I was looking at it just a couple of weeks ago, and it was amazing how many people wrote in, good luck on your writing career. And at the time, I thought I was going to be writing more horror. And so a lot of them kind of referenced that, good luck on writing all those scary stories and things like that. But, it's 21 years later, and I'm finally now kind of making good on all the promises and dreams that I had back when I was in high school.
Nice. That's a good way to get started, I would imagine. Now, you're obviously a big fan of various forms of media. I mean, you're a writer, you're host of a movie podcast, writing podcast, you're an avid gamer. What is it about, say, a novel that really appeals to you more than, say, a screenplay or I don't know, any other kind of story?
You mean the reading or the writing?
The writing.
Well, I've never actually written a screenplay, in the movie sense. When I used to write comic books, you kind of write those in a screenplay format. And there's actually a lot of appeal to me in writing screenplays because one of my favorite aspects of writing a novel is the dialogue and the character development you get through how people talk and the words that they choose when they speak. And somebody like a Kevin Smith or a Joss Whedon, I think both of them have an amazing ear for interesting dialogue. It may not always be the most true dialogue. I mean, will a teenager really say some of the things that maybe a Whedon character or a Smith character says? Maybe not, but it's such a unique way to phrase things in an interesting way that they write their dialogue that I actually love it. And when I write, I really take care that in my dialogue, I make the way a character speaks very specific to them so that even if I didn't use dialogue tags like Dave said or whatever, you would know who was talking. And so writing a screenplay, which is almost entirely dialogue, save for, a few pieces of exteriors and whatnot, it's kind of appealing, but you lose, for me, what novels really bring to the table, which is that narrative flow and the emotion and the thoughts of the characters and how those characters are reacting to their environment. There are whenever I watch a TV show or a movie and I see a scene that really impresses me, I start thinking to myself, how would I write that? And there are moments when I'm like, I don't know how I would ever write that because it's such a cinematic thing. But there are also a lot of moments in books where a phrase will be turned and a passage will be given that I'm like, you could not film this. There is no technique for showing a character's thoughts about their own history through their own eyes in a particular way in that particular moment, but through words you can do it. And so all the different mediums have their pluses and minuses and the things that they do well and the things that they can't. A novel is, I think, the best way to really get into the mind and heart and soul of characters and really understand the world through their eyes. And I think it's through books that we can really start to understand characters and people that are other than us. Whereas through a movie or a TV show or a game, games can kind of approach it, but you don't get a lot of narrative. You don't get a lot of internal dialogue through a game. So even if you're playing it through their eyes, you're still missing a huge part of who they are. In a book, you get that. And I think that's why novels, no matter how big movies get and how big TV shows get or games, novels will always have their place in our culture because they give something that none of the others can.
Yeah,
And that appeals to me.
they let you be part of it. Whereas, a movie or a TV show, it's laid out for you. There, if it's written well, there can be some illusion that you can have some ideas, but when you're reading a really well written book, I mean, it's all in your head. And if it's done well, every person's going to have a different view of a character or a place or what that location looks like, or, etc.
Well, in a book, you can't rely on tricks to get people. You can't depend on the music to, create a mood or an atmosphere. You can't, there's no such thing as a jump cut or a jump scare or something like that. In words, you can't hide behind little tricks. The reader either is in that moment or they're not. And if you wrote it well, then they're going to be in that moment. You take The Exorcist, for example. That movie's scary. The book, even fucking scarier. Because the book can do things and go places that the movies never can. So I'll always, no matter what, I will always love, my stories and my novels. And I'll always want to write. Hopefully, I'll always want to write them, and hopefully people will always want to read them. But we'll have to find out.
We'll see. Now, you've been the host of the writing podcast, Dead Robot Society, for 4 years?
About 4.5.
4.5 years, okay. What initially brought you to want to do that?
I had listened to podcasts for a good little while before that. And I think I was actually listening to podcasts before they were even called that. There were some different shows that I was able to download off the internet and, manually load onto whatever weird little 128 megabyte MP3 player I had at the time. It wasn't until I think a little while into it that they actually got the name podcasts and actually started becoming a genre. A medium unto themselves. But I listened for a long time, and I love that idea of people just in their living rooms talking about things they loved and creating these kind of homespun radio shows. And I always thought, I'd like to do that. But is there a topic that's, not already incredibly well serviced by better people than I and more knowledgeable people? I love movies, but there were several movie podcasts that I listened to that did it so much better than I could. Same thing for games. But at the time, I didn't think that there were that many writing podcasts. And writing was something that I had recently come back to with a vengeance. And I thought, I could do a writing show and I could have it all about, hosted by people like me who are just beginning and who want to share with each other our trials, tribulations, and maybe through using the podcast as a door, invite people who have succeeded to come and talk to us and share their knowledge and pass on how they succeeded and maybe let us know what we could be in for, maybe burst some bubbles, kill some dreams, but maybe create some new ones along the way. And of course, if I had known then how many writing podcasts there actually were that I later learned about, I might not have done it, but I didn't. And so in that ignorance, I created the Dead Robots Society, and I was able to get a couple of people to come on with me, and using Skype and, a little shitty headset recorder at first, put the show together, and we've kind of been running really strong ever since.
Nice. Well, here's one thing. You have written a couple short stories, and you have gotten those published. What finally said to you, I have to do a whole novel? I have to conquer a full novel this time.
Well, I had written years ago. I had belonged to a writing group back when AOL was actually a legitimate internet, source. Back before IPs, internet providers really kind of spread out. In the days of CompuServe and whatnot, I was on America Online, and I happened to find a group of people who wrote short stories with each other within the universe of the Wing Commander computer games. And I was a huge Wing Commander fan. I think from the third one to the fourth one and all the stuff that came out, and then Prophecy. Loved the games, thought they were amazing. I'd never written sci-fi
Hmm.
up until I played Wing Commander. And I loved the universe. And when I had gotten some ideas for where they could take that universe for future games, and I'd written Origin, who owned Wing Commander at the time, and gave them my ideas and wrote out these long, story origins and whatnot for what they could do. And of course, never heard back, and probably ended up in somebody's trash can. But because I'd found a group online that wrote stories in the Wing Commander universe, and because in writing those story ideas, it had sparked this sci-fi lover in me because for a long time I never thought I could write sci-fi. Sci-fi seemed like it was something that only learned people could do, people who understood astronomy and cosmology and those sorts of things. You had to have a real big brain to write sci-fi. It was only later I learned, no, you don't really. But through writing that stuff for Origin and the hopes of getting, a gaming job, I found that I could actually write sci-fi, and the group reinforced that. And together we wrote short stories back and forth, telling this shared story of all of our characters on these ships. And it lasted for several years. And over that time, I later put all of my stories in one document just to see how long it was. And it ended up being over, I think, 300,000 to 400,000 words. And
Wow.
for reference, a novel is usually between 80 and about 110, 120,000 words. So if you take 100,000 words as your average book, through that club, I'd written about 3 to 4 books worth of content with them. And they were constantly helping and cheerleading and encouraging me. But a little while after that, I kind of stopped writing because I had gotten an idea for a novel and gave it a good try, but I kept feeling like I wasn't good enough and I wasn't writing what I thought it should be. And I gave it up for a good long while.
Hmm.
But after I got married and my wife started, I would constantly tell her, if I was back writing that book, I would do this or I would do that. And finally, she just turned around and she said, either write the damn book or shut the fuck up about it. And in all honesty, I cannot blame her. Because if you've got someone who is constantly talking about something but never doing it, it gets old. And for her, it had gotten extremely old. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. Either I write this thing and I get it out of me, or I don't. And so I sat down and I actually wrote, the full novel Harbinger. And in the midst of that, I started the podcast. And so these things are kind of running in tandem. And I wrote the first book. And while I was trying to find an agent or a publisher for it, I was writing the second book, because it was a trilogy. And I was about halfway through the second book when everybody who had been telling me, don't write a sequel until you've sold the first one, that advice finally broke into my head. Because it wasn't looking like I was ever going to find a agent or a publisher interested in that book. And if you can't sell the first one, don't even write the second one. So I stopped writing it, and then I started writing short stories. And I thought, well, let me work through some ideas. Let me develop a little bit of technique. Short story writing is a different beast than novel writing. It takes a slightly different skill set, but there are things you can learn in one and take over to the other. And so I wrote short stories for a good little while. And once I felt like I had worked that out of my system and started feeling a little better about myself, because my first short story, or one of my short stories, had won honorable mention in the Writers of the Future contest. Another one won first prize in a short story writing contest. A couple of others were getting published in online magazines and in an actual print magazine of short stories. And so with those successes making me feel better, I got back to work on novels. And I don't know if I'll ever go back to writing short stories again, only because I'm a pitifully slow writer. And any time that I take away from novels to write something else is just putting off that novel that much further. So if I ever become quicker, then maybe I'll return to it and kind of write them in tandem. But for now, it's mostly novels.
I gotcha. Well, now we know that the book is out, and we're going to find out a little bit more about it here in a second. But I kind of want to know, now that it's done, it's all completed, did you enjoy the experience, writing it, editing it, all the way up to publication?
It's though I really hate to make the comparison because I'm sure everyone will tell me it's so wrong. I kind of have to make it, even if it's only just for myself. It's a bit like, I guess, giving birth. The end result you love and you adore. And there are moments of the creation and the carrying of that you love and you adore. But there are definite moments that you probably wouldn't like to not remember. And there are parts of it that you don't remember and you're glad. And I think the same kind of holds true for any kind of artistic endeavor, whether you're writing or you're painting or sculpting or what. Um, there are moments when that you're full of glee and I'm at the keyboard and my fingers are just clacking away and my eyes are ablaze with the story that's rolling behind it and I'm having a fantastic amount of time. But then you hit those moments where the words aren't coming or the words that are coming suck
Hmm.
and you're just struggling to get it done. Writing, the first draft of a novel, um, I don't find as difficult as I used to, especially with the book I'm writing right now. It's when I'm writing, I'm really writing.
Hmm.
It's the editing stage that really can get incredibly exhilarating, but also just incredibly tiring because, I mean, you will sit there and you'll spend 10 minutes struggling over should I use black or should I use ebony? Which one of these words is really going to carry the feel I want it to have? And you can definitely spend a lot of time over just the minutia of a word or a sentence. And editing Haywire was tough because I had written it and finished it and put it away a couple of years ago. I'd written it, kind of put it away, and then I got an agent for it. And I had thought, okay, well, I got an agent. It's in her hands. I'll go off and write something else. Only to learn later that she was a liar, and that whole situation blew up, not just in my face, but in everyone who had believed in her
Yeah.
and what she was doing for them. We all collectively were blown out of the water one morning when she just told everybody she had family problems and she wasn't going to do it anymore, and goodbye and good luck to you.
Nice.
And so after that, I was like, all right, if this book is ever going to go anywhere, it's going to be on me to do it. And luckily, I found a publisher who wanted to publish it, who believed in it. Um, and so after I got his edits back and started rewriting it, because I had finished one novel and was mostly through another novel, hopefully in that time I had grown as a writer. And so when I'm editing this book, I am as I'm editing all the stuff he wants me to change, I'm also changing tons of it as I go because hopefully I'm better now than I was then. And the way that I wrote then isn't how I write now. And so I'm trying to bring that early prose up to the level of where I'm at now. And I didn't, completely rewrite the novel, but in editing it, which took about a month and a half, I did a really extensive uh, re re editing of the book to hopefully make it more evocative of where I am today, as opposed to 2 or 3 years ago when I originally wrote it.
Okay.
And that was painful, a lot tougher than I thought it would be.
Well, but you got through it. That's what
Yeah,
matters.
and I learned from it. There are a lot of things that I learned in doing that edit. There's a thing in writing called active voice and passive voice. And it's where you write, the way you write something can either have the reader feeling like it is a passive moment or active. You almost always want to go active, but it is so easy to write it in a passive voice. And I used to do that a lot. And that was one of those things I was constantly fixing, was going from passive, making it active, getting rid of adverbs, doing less showing and doing more telling, or yes, doing more telling and just generally tightening. But I learned a lot. So even though it sucked and it was hard, I came through it, I think, a better writer than I went into it.
Well, tell me or tell those listening, what is Haywire about? I know it's not about Gina Serrano.
And, and this is a hard question to answer because
You
with
can
a
read the
lot,
leaflet if you want.
well, no, it's because a lot of what I write, a lot of the stories that I tell, for some reason or other, they always seem to be the story that takes place after something huge happened. And with Haywire, it's a science fiction story that takes place several hundred years into the future. In order to know what Haywire is about, you kind of have to know what led up to it. And so I'm always trying to really be brief and succinct, and I will do that now. Within this future, humanity has spread into the solar system, has colonized various moons of different planets within our solar system, space stations, the whole thing. Um, and one day within this far future, an alien race arrives in our solar system and immediately begins to attack us, to conquer us. Their numbers and their technology are much bigger than us. And so the only weapon that we have that's capable of actually hurting them and driving them back are nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
We could send 100 battleships against theirs, but they just don't have the armor. They don't have the weaponry to deal with them, but a nuclear weapon does. And so using these nukes, they drive the Hezron, who are the aliens, out of our solar system. But then they return in greater numbers, and we have to do it again. And when you're using nukes, the terrible thing is that as much damage as you do to your opponent, you're kind of doing it to yourself, especially when what you're doing is blowing, nuking a colony on a moon that's your colony.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to because you're fighting an enemy that's so much more powerful than you. And so this battle that develops over the Hezron becomes one of desperation because how much damage can we do to ourselves before we might as well have just let them do it?
Mm-hmm.
And things look grim when a scientist by the name of Dr. Grossbeck, who is a nefarious figure for his illegal research, comes forward and says, I have this technology that could turn the tide. And it's the Titan technology. And what it is it's these nanites that he's created that when a human soldier is injected with these nanites, it rewrites, it enters their body and changes them on a cellular level so that they suddenly become, they have the strength of 10 men and they can
Super
run.
soldiers.
They're supermen for all intents and purposes with strength and speed and reflexes that no human could ever dream to possess. They can rip through steel. They can jump incredible heights. They can do all the things that a normal human being can't. But the nanites also exist on their skin as this armor that can reshape itself and reconfigure depending on the situation that they're in. And it can shape weapons that they might need, whether it's blades or blunt instruments. And so using this armor, using these enhanced abilities, and using technology built for them, these Titans are able to stand toe-to-toe with the Hezron and drive them out of the solar system without the damage that nuclear weapons would do. But when the Titans drive the Hezron out of our solar system, they know the Hezron will return. They always do. And so they vow that they're going to chase the Hezron to the end of the galaxy, if need be, to make sure that they never again threaten humanity. And so they leave and they chase after the Hezron. And then 100 years goes by. None of them are ever heard from again, the Titans or the Hezron. And so the whole war, humanity is trying to come back from it and rebuild and heal the wounds that war created. And the Titans start to become a kind of figures of myth. Even though you could look in a book or a video and see them, because they've been gone for so long and because of all the fantastic things they were capable of doing, they kind of become these figures of myth. But then 100 years passes, and suddenly a Titan returns. And she returns because at the very end of their war, when the Titans had finally reached the Hezron homeworld and were about to smash them and finish them off for good, and the Hezron's dying action, they unleashed their final weapon, which was a nanite, a nanovirus, that when it infected a Titan would rewrite the code of their nanites and turn them into rampaging, bloodthirsty beasts that wanted to do nothing more than to return to our solar system and to destroy everything that they had spent 100 years fighting and dying for. And Artemis, who is this Titan, sees this infection coming because she sees her fellow Titans being mutated and changed by it. And so she's able to leave the planet and come back to Earth and to our solar system, hoping that she can get here before they can and find a way of either curing the Titans or, unfortunately, perhaps having to find a way to kill the very people that she spent 100 years fighting beside. And that's the story of her coming here, joining forces with a scholar, a woman who had spent her entire life learning about the Titans and actually overseeing a museum dedicated to them, and the scholar's son, and the three of them having to find a way of either curing or killing these Titans before they can come and destroy everything.
And that's Haywire.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say, and everything I've heard from people that have read it, as well as what I've read, has been very positive. I haven't heard a whole lot of negative, and not just because they like Justin Macumber. I mean, people would be like, "Oh, Justin, great job," and then behind, but that really sucked. I think you're getting a lot of good feedback, and definitely you've got a lot of supportive fans out there. Are you pretty happy with the reactions you're getting?
So far, I mean, I've heard a lot of good. So far, I really haven't heard anything negative about it. Not that it would hurt my feelings. I mean, I love Stephen King, but I know a lot of people who don't. And I figure if someone of his caliber and someone that I enjoy so much can have people who don't like his work, I can be okay with it too. And I think any artist of any stripe has to be able to, accept that there are just going to be people who don't like what they write. And there are as many different reasons for why they don't like it as there are for people who don't like it. And sometimes it's, it can get to you, but so far I've not heard anything negative. And if there's people who don't like it, I would like for them to tell me what it was that they didn't care for, and there may be something that I did that maybe a plot hole that I didn't see, or, I had the character do something that I thought made sense and maybe they didn't. I'd like to know. I'm not so precious with my work that someone coming to me and saying I had an issue with this, that, or the other is going to hurt my feelings. But it's been positive. It's only been out less than a week, and so there really hasn't been much to hear, and what little there has been has fortunately been good. I did pass the book along to some people that I respect to get blurbs from them in the hopes of putting it on the cover, putting it on the interior, using it on promotions and the website. And I've gotten some blurbs back that were really incredibly generous and nice, and I know that they didn't provide them just because I know them or just because they want to be nice. These are people who are not going to put their name or their endorsement on something if they don't like it. And that's the way I want it to be. And so far, they've been incredibly positive too. So so far, I'm happy. We'll see.
Well, let me ask you if you could, because in relation to the whole podcast, if you could pick like your dream team, who would fill the roles of the film version of your book? Just the major roles.
I don't know. And it's kind of odd for me because normally when it comes to writing, I always picture particular people in the roles of the characters that I'm writing. That can quite often help you find their voice. But the only character who I have a very definitive desire to see an actor or actress play is the character of the Dr. Alicia Campbell, who is the scholar and the mother of Sean, the 16-year-old boy in the story. I would love it if Anna Torv were to play her. And she plays Olivia on Fringe.
Oh, okay.
For some reason, I was writing one day, and I watched Fringe, and Olivia, the character, said something, and the way she was standing and the way she said it, for whatever reason, just really reminded me of my character. And in that moment, I cannot read that character, and I couldn't write her without seeing Anna Torv saying it. And there were a few moments where I actually wasn't sure, how should I have her say this? And I would envision that actress saying it, and then the words just kind of came. So she's the only one that I've really got a definitive opinion on. I'd kind of thought there's a character named Alex who is an Alliance investigator, kind of an FBI agent for the American Alliance in the game and or in the in the book.
Already have a game version too?
And yeah, I do. And he is also the boyfriend of Alicia, Anna Torres' character. And for some reason, Javier Bardem keeps coming to my brain. And his name is Alex Delgado, which is a Spanish name. And for some reason, he kind of makes me think of that character in my book. So those two I can definitely see. As far as, Artemis, I describe her mostly in terms of having very olive-toned skin and dark hair and dark eyes. And so, if I were to have a casting couch, I would love to get, somebody like Jessica Biel or Jennifer Biel or something like that on it. But the more I see the woman who plays the princess in John Carter, I start seeing kind of her in that role.
I see her in every role at this point.
And the woman who played Zoe in Firefly, the big Amazonian woman, she really strikes me as an Artemis.
Gina
type.
Torres?
Yeah, Gina Torres. She could play that part too, but I don't know. And as far as Sean goes, I don't know too many 16-year-old actor guys, so I couldn't even begin to guess who might play that.
The Biebs? The Justin
No,
Bieber?
fuck you. I think I would just disown everything.
So what's your next novel going to be about? Or do you have an idea what you're... I mean, I know you're pretty far along, right?
Well, the next book that's going to be coming out, which will hopefully be later this year, is a book called A Minor Magic. And it's a complete departure from science fiction. It's what I call a post-apocalyptic urban fantasy. And I don't even... do you know what urban fantasy is?
Yeah, that's basically where Ice Cube shows up. No, go ahead.
No, urban fantasy, think of Twilight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or maybe you don't want to think of Twilight, but books like Twilight that take place in kind of a modern setting, and they have fantastical elements to them, but they're not really a fantasy in the Tolkien tradition.
Gotcha.
Nor is it really a horror novel, but kind of with a foot in a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of horror, but all of it in a world modern setting. And so they call that urban fantasy.
Okay.
The next book is a post-apocalyptic urban fantasy in that it takes place 10 years after the world burned. And in the book they talk about that 10 years in the past, this fire that no one can explain or understand suddenly enveloped the world, and most of the world's population died. Most of the world's cities were destroyed. And it lasted for one night, and then it was over. And the remnants of humanity just are now trying to eke out whatever existence they can, never really understanding what happened. A lot of people think it was the apocalypse. It was the rapture, and they all, that the war, that God showed his wrath. And so a lot of people see it in those kinds of religious terms, and it's obviously they would. But the story centers on a young girl named Skylar, who is about 15, and she has been living on this small farm with this elderly couple who've adopted her. And one morning, the farm dog, for whatever reason, suddenly growls and attacks her. And when she raises her hands up to fend him off, flames leap from her hands and kill it. And unfortunately, the adoptive father sees this and immediately, even though he's had this little girl living with him for like 10 years or so, suddenly sees her as devil's spawn, as something that came from that fire and has now revealed itself. And so Skylar is forced off this farm, and now she has to make her way into this burned world, not understanding where that fire and that power came from. What does it mean? Who is she really? And what does she have to do with that night 10 years in the past when those fires burned? And through the book, you find those things out. And her journey is seeing what those things are. And I wrote it as a bit of a love letter, kind of, to the South. I'm, Texan by birth, and no matter what, no matter how I might feel about certain aspects of being a Southerner, it's in my bones. And the book takes place primarily in Tennessee, or it starts in Tennessee, migrates down into Louisiana, and then ends in Texas. So I wanted to write an urban fantasy that really embraced the South. Most urban fantasy seems to take place like in Chicago, New York, large metropolitan areas, or more up in the Pacific Northwest, like Twilight and those books. But I wanted something more in the South, and that kind of represented it. And so it hits Graceland, part of the book. And when I went to visit Graceland, I was walking around, and I kept saying to myself, this would make a fantastic setting for some kind of post-apocalyptic story. I mean, this is a beautiful house, but what would it look like after some cataclysmic event? And so Graceland, Memphis, New Orleans, and all the Mardi Gras accoutrement that is in New Orleans, all that's in it, and hopefully it'll be out from Crescent Moon Press later this year, because they have it right now, and I'm just waiting for them to give me their edits to start editing on that. But until I get that, I'm trying to finish the first draft on a horror novel that I'm working on right now called Stillwater.
Nice. So you got a lot in the frying pan.
I do, and Stillwater is my first horror novel, and I'm loving writing it. Hopefully, it will find a home somewhere once I'm done with it and have it polished and ready to go out. And I've already got ideas for several different novels that I could write after I'm done with Stillwater. But if people read Haywire and they like it, and they want to know more or read more about it, that entire Hezron War and the moments leading up to the Titans being created and then their fight. I have not written that story, but I could, and I would be interested in doing it if people would be interested in reading it. But I'll have to see.
So go buy Haywire.
Well, go buy it, and if you like it, let me know. And if you want that story, I'm as curious as anybody to know what goes on. I mean, just because ultimately where the story is going to end, that doesn't mean that the journey getting there can't be interesting. I mean, look at Titanic. We all knew that ship was going to sink, but that didn't stop it from becoming the second highest grossing movie ever. You can know where it's going, just make it interesting. And I don't know a lot of the things that went into that Hezron War. I'd be as curious as anyone to sit down and write that story, but I don't want to write it if there's not going to be an audience for it.
Understandable. Well, that's about all I had. Do you have any last thoughts before we wrap it up?
I hope that the people who listen to this show and listen to you and me and Brian and Scotty are going to be interested in it. I realize that this is a movie podcast, mm-hmm. and it's not a book podcast, and not everybody who listens is interested in reading. And I don't blame people who don't pick up a book. I don't read nearly as much as I wish that I did. And those who listen who do read, they may not be interested in sci-fi, but it's a book that took a lot of hard work and a lot of time and a lot of care. And I'm incredibly proud of what eventually came out. And I hope that the people who would be interested or think they might be interested will pick it up. And if you're not, if you know someone who might be interested, let them know and pass it along. My wife is, she's been my support ever since I got laid off about 3 years ago. And, when I lost my job, we took that as kind of a sign that maybe I should give this writing thing a real try instead of just doing it when I had the time around my job. And so I would like to, be able to actually have a career again and be able to support us as opposed to just being her. And so if you like sci-fi, if any of this sounds interesting, pick up a copy. If you think you might, but you're not sure, come by my website. There's a sample of the first 3 chapters. And that first 3 chapters gives you an introduction to all of the main characters. So It's definitely, if you're unsure, by the time you're done with it, you should know whether or not you're interested. But just come by and take a look. And if this one's not to your taste, then maybe a Minor Magic will be.
Hmm.
And we'll just have to see where it goes. But I would be remiss if I didn't, say thanks to you.
Oh, you don't have to thank me.
Well,
I didn't
no,
write a word.
not to get too bromancy on you, but when I lost my job 3 years ago and started writing full time, 99% of my time, I can say that,
Hmm.
probably 75% of my time, I spend alone at home with my dogs and cats, writing or doing chores or whatever needs doing. And, my poor wife, when she gets home and I suddenly just jump on her and ask her, "How's your day? What are things, what's going on?" Because she works at the same place I used to work at.
Hmm.
And so she kind of lets me know where the people I used to know what's going on with them. And I'm constantly on her about just to talk and have human interaction. But when you invited me to come on the show and start doing it with you, the nights we do this show are most of my human interaction outside of talking with my wife Kristen. And I don't go play pool with my buddies because I really don't have those much anymore.
That's what happens when you're.
I did it to myself, but
Mhm.
I don't go shoot pool. I don't hang out at bars. I don't watch sports with other people mostly. And so the nights I spend with you and Brian and Scotty that's kind of my quote unquote my bro time. And I really appreciate you guys having me on and being so supportive and, letting me share in your good time. And I know I talk a lot and sometimes make inappropriate jokes, but you keep me on anyway. And I really thank you for it. And you have been one of the biggest supporters of this book and me. And I cannot say enough how much I appreciate it and how much it means to me that in the short time we've known each other, that we've become such good friends and that you've really got my back. And I appreciate that a great deal, more than you know.
Well, you're very welcome. I wouldn't support it if I didn't think it was good. And I did read his short story, which is The Ties That Bind or The Tie That Bind. I always say it wrong.
It's The Ties That
The
Bind.
Ties
It's
That
a
Bind.
four-parter short story that I lumped together
Yeah.
in one volume. It's available on Kindle, and I think there's a print version of it too, but it's on Kindle. I've got another short story called Pirates of the Crimson Sand, which is more of a Flash Gordon-y, John Carter-y type of old-fashioned sci-fi short story that's available on my website. And I have some others that you can go and read. There's actually an erotica short story series. If you actually want to read me write smut, there's one up there available to read. I wrote it for
That might
a
be
friend of mine who does an erotica podcast.
that'll be a little weird voice in my head. I'll probably pass on that.
Well, and considering that I'm writing from a woman's perspective, that really writing that was an incredibly challenging thing. But there's a lot of short stories on my website that you can read for free, and I would have more. But unfortunately, the last several I wrote are published elsewhere, and so I can't put them on my site yet. But when I can, I will. But there's all sorts of stuff if you want to see what kind of writer I am up on my site.
Well, I read that, and it was a very good story, and you got a lot accomplished in, was it 50 pages? So, whatever the page count was, you actually got a pretty solid story. And I think I've read more than the first 3 chapters, probably the first 4 chapters of Haywire, and so far it's starting off good. And I don't really want to talk about it too much because I'm very big, once I start a story until I finish it, I don't really want to go into it. Just because I'm afraid that I'll hear other people's thoughts on it, and then I'll change how I feel, you know how this works.
Schofield dies at the end of it.
And honestly, anybody that's still listening, because it's 50 some minutes into we've been interviewing Justin.
I'm sorry.
No, that's not sorry. I'm saying if you're still listening, you really want to buy the book, so just go buy it. Really, that's all. You obviously like Mr. Macumber, buy his book. Well, that is Justin. He's obviously a voice on our show, but he also has his own podcast called Dead Robot Society that he does all by himself. His buddy Terry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Terry and Eliana.
That's done every week, and that's basically 4 writers. by writers. He's also has a blog at justinmacumber.com, and of course right here on the Hollywood Outsider, where he's a host. Justin Macumber's Haywire is available online now through Amazon as a paperback, Kindle, or it's available also as a Nook digital download.
It's on Smashwords, and hopefully soon it will be on the iBook store and available for the Kobo and the Sony e-reader.
See, now all we got to do is get you an Audible. So Brian, I mean, even though he bought a copy, so he'll actually hear it.
Well, my publisher has a deal with a company that works with Audible, and so I will probably have them do the audio version as opposed to me doing it.
That's good. And then you can hear somebody else, and then you know what you're gonna be critical about that. That's not how they would have said it. What they would have said.
That's right. That's not how you pronounce that.
Well, I want to thank you for giving up your time. I know it's been a long period of time, and I'm not the interviewer that someone of I'm not Johnny Carson, for Christ's sake.
Please stop. You do a fantastic job, and you do a great job of hosting the show. And I will take nothing from Scotty, but it's definitely when you're not there, I can feel it, and I'm pretty sure the listeners can feel it too. You are the heart and soul of Hollywood Outsider, whether you know it or not, and you do a really good job of taking three other guys who are just misfits and making a pretty good conversation out of it.
Well, you guys make that work. Let's stop sucking each other off. I want to thank Justin for coming on and doing this special interview. I really want to encourage people to buy his book. I wouldn't encourage people to buy it if I didn't think it had merit. I think it's, from what I've read, strong storytelling, and the reviews that I've heard are very positive. So take a peek at it. If it's up your alley, pick it up. I want to thank everybody again for listening to this special edition of the whole podcast, and be sure to come back every week for a new regular episode. We'll have a new one up on Thursday as always, by Thursday as always. And that'll be a normal episode. And be sure to tune in this week if you're listening to this interview the week that it comes out, because we're going to have a nice little rant on a little company that went off on us. And remember, the next time that you head to a theater,
enemies.
Yeah, sons of bitches. The next time you head to a theater, remember to buy popcorn.